Welcome everyone. Today we're taking an in-depth look at the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible by Martin Abegg, Peter Flint, and Eugene Ulrich. This hardcover edition is 649 pages, and it features an English translation of the biblical texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's explore everything from its physical characteristics to the fascinating variants noted in its footnotes. As you can see, I've added a Brodart archival cover to protect the dust jacket. That's a personal choice, but it keeps the cover pristine if you plan on using this book a lot or collecting it long-term. The binding here is glued, not sewn. You can see the tail band at the base of the spine. It's a small decorative cloth strip that gives the spine a nice finished look. The book's dimensions are about 9.25 inches tall by 6.25 inches wide and about 1.5 inches thick. It's a substantial hardcover, but still feels manageable in the hand. Inside, each page layout has generous margins and room at the bottom for notes. You can see it's typically a single column of main text, with footnotes clearly separated below. Let's measure the text block. The page size and layout leave enough white space to keep it readable. The main text is a comfortably sized serif font, probably around 10 or 11 points. It's dark enough for easy reading without looking cramped. Down here, you'll see the footnotes in a smaller font, which lets them fit more variant details and explanations without overwhelming the main text. It's still quite legible. I want to talk about the paper. It's moderately thick, with a matte finish, minimal glare. Opacity is decent. You might see some ghosting of the text on the other side, but it isn't distracting. Overall, it's good quality for a reference work with nearly 650 pages. Each biblical book includes an introduction that explains which scrolls the editors used, the nature of the surviving fragments, and any major textual challenges. Because these texts are arranged roughly in their historical order, not the typical order you see in modern Bibles, you'll want to check these footnotes. They'll indicate exactly which book, chapter, and verse you're reading, so you don't get lost. Moving on, there's a bibliography listing scholarly works on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and textual criticism, handy if you're doing academic or in-depth research. Here you'll see the publishing info, the dates, printing details, and all the typical disclaimers about permissions. Nothing too surprising, but nice to verify authenticity. The table of contents shows you exactly how each of the biblical books is arranged. You'll see that we start with something akin to the Pentateuch, then follow a roughly chronological sequence of the Hebrew scriptures. At the front, there's a meaty introduction giving you the background of the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery, why they matter for biblical studies, and how this translation was produced. Before you dive in, check out the How to Read This Book guide. It explains all the symbols, abbreviations, and editorial decisions, really important if you're new to textual variants. Let's jump into Genesis 1, which is where the biblical text starts. Immediately you'll see bracketed text and italics. Let's see what those mean. Square brackets like these indicate text that's missing or damaged in the scrolls but reconstructed by comparing other texts like the Masoretic or Septuagint. Italics may designate text that's interpretative or expanded. The editors clarify those conventions in How to Read This Book. You'll notice references to specific scrolls like 4Q-Gen or 1Q-Gen. This tells you which manuscripts from Qumran they used to form the translation. It's a fantastic feature for deeper study. Some notes are flagged with a gray square. These are special commentary notes calling out a unique textual issue or a significant variant in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's a cool example. A scroll that aligns more closely with the Greek Septuagint, LXX, than with the Masoretic text. That highlights how the biblical text wasn't monolithic in ancient times. A gray triangle signals yet another layer of notes, sometimes referencing a major scholarly debate or an alternate Hebrew reading. The editors keep these distinctions clear for us. Once again, if you're confused by the symbols or references, How to Read This Book is your best friend. It's only a few pages, but essential reading. Remember, 4Q-Gen means Cave 4 at Qumran, containing a fragment of Genesis. The naming conventions might look odd at first, but once you know the system, it's easy to navigate. Throughout these notes, you'll see abbreviations like MT for Masoretic text, SP for Samaritan Pentateuch, and LXX for the Septuagint. Keep these in mind, as they appear often. There's a partial list of places where the Dead Sea Scrolls and LXX line up against the MT. R. Grant Jones compiled notes on the Septuagint that track these variants if you want to go deeper. The introduction also digs into how the Old Testament differs between Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic canons. There's a table showing the different orders of books. It also mentions evidence of Greek LXX fragments dating back to before Christ, confirming how widely used the Septuagint was in the Second Temple period. There's a helpful illustration comparing the later Masoretic tradition with these older Hebrew texts, showing places where scribes might have standardized or clarified the text. Did you know there are dozens of biblical manuscripts among the Dead Sea Scrolls? This intro gives you the exact numbers and an overview of which books are best represented. This edition is focused strictly on biblical books, but there's a brief essay on how 1 Enoch appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you're interested, there are separate translations of Enoch by scholars like Nicolsburg and Vanderkam. Here's a fragment of 1 Enoch from Qumran, just an example of what these texts look like. Amazing stuff. The introduction also touches on the Dead Sea Scrolls references to the Son of Man in texts like Enoch, important for understanding Second Temple Jewish thought. The editors give special attention to Daniel. Qumran had fragments that show some unique variants. If you're into apocalyptic literature, definitely check these notes. So that's our deep dive into the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. As you can tell, it's an incredible resource if you're curious about how the Hebrew Bible looked and evolved before the Masoretic text became the norm. The footnotes, intros, and variant readings make this a real goldmine for scholars, students, and anyone fascinated by the history of Scripture. If you enjoyed this walkthrough, give it a thumbs up or drop a comment with your questions. Thanks so much for watching, and if you are interested, I'll include a link under the video for Dead